Welcome to Scrolling to Death. I'm Nikki, and I'm here with two of my favorite teachers, Matt Miles and Joe Clement. Hi, guys. How are you today?
Great. Thanks for having us again.
Great. How you doing?
I'm doing good. So we talked about a month ago. Something funky happened with the audio. So we're talking again, which I'm excited about. But one thing that didn't get lost in the audio were some really good thoughts from Matt's side and then a thought from me. So I shared those on Instagram, and several people asked when the interview will be live. So they really resonated with what we were sharing. And so I'm happy we're able to do this again. And followers didn't hold back on their opinions. So at the end of the episode, we're going to read you some of those comments on the clips, and then we'll kind of get our feedback and see how we feel about the reactions. But first, let's cover a few highlights from your book. So your book's called Screen Schooled. I don't have it in my hand today because I'm making my husband read it, and it's in his work bag. But I shared before that it's one of my favorite books in this space. So why don't, Joe, do you want to tell listeners about the book?
Yeah. In 2017, we had a book published called Screen Schooled, and it grew out of our experience in the classroom mostly. And then what we were seeing, not only in the classroom, but from interviewing people, child psychologists, therapists that work with kids. And we were just seeing a lack of the ability of kids to think, to focus, problem solve, interact socially. And we started to look for what was going on. And we found that there really wasn't very much out there in terms of screen overuse, specifically in education, and what the effects were in terms of schools. And so we decided to fill that space with what we discovered, not only empirically about what we were seeing, but also what we found in terms of the scholarly research that was done. So it's called Screen Schooled, and it's been out for a few years now.
It's still so relevant. And I guess we've had COVID since then, so things have just been exacerbated. But Matt, what made you want to get involved in that project?
You know, Joe and I spent a lot of time talking about our students' ability over the years. And what we noticed around the time that smartphone use became pretty ubiquitous among our students is that there was a really quick and sharp decline in a whole variety of areas. You know, the one that was most obvious was their ability to focus. Students really struggled to pull their attention away from their smartphone and on like cognitively difficult and sometimes less engaging content than what they're accessing on their phone, stuff that we're trying to teach them and convey to them. Mm-hmm. So that was the obvious thing. But then it also kind of started spilling over into their social interactions with each other. We noticed that kids really struggled when they were together to communicate, to share ideas. You know, just one of the anecdotes we always tell is that we have this free period in our day where kids can go and do whatever they want. Mm-hmm. And they'd often coordinate with their friends to go to a particular classroom at a particular time. And pre-smartphone, you know, it was hard to keep those kids quiet, right? They're loud, they're talking, they're playing, they're being rambunctious. Mm-hmm. Within a few years, it was hard to get them to talk. The room was deafening in its silence. You know, you put a group of late adolescents in a confined space, and suddenly they're not talking. That became kind of alarming, and we kind of came to the idea that maybe there's some research out there about this relationship of what we're seeing in the classroom to smartphone use. And mm-hmm. when we started doing a deeper dive into it, like Joe was just saying, the research out there was overwhelming. And what was interesting is meanwhile, we were being told how great technology is and how it's going to unlock all these potentials in education. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't what we were seeing. We're seeing that the way that technology was being used by our students was in most ways harming their education. So there was kind of these polar ideas of what we were seeing and then what we're being told. So that was kind of the push. We really wrote Screen Schooled as an argument against this idea that technology is the future of education. It's going to revolutionize education, and that if you're not on board, that you're going to be left behind. And that's really what we're trying to argue against in the book.
Mm-hmm. I've been interviewing a lot of teachers. One theme that's definitely been standing out to me, and all the teachers are agreeing, is, and this is a nod to the subtitle in your book, is that technology is making kids dumber and also making teachers' jobs harder. So, Joe, would you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. And the key, and you mentioned the subtitle of the book, the key is overuse. Certainly Nobody's talking about banning all technology all the time. I mean, we're not anyway. Mm-hmm. But for a teacher, you are constantly faced with the battle because kids are kids and they have an underdeveloped prefrontal cortex. They have very little ability to control their impulses and delay gratification. And so if they're in something in a class and, you're talking about something riveting like marginal cost or whatever, and, they're bored for 10 consecutive seconds, their phone comes out and they've got something immediately gratifying right there.
Mm-hmm.
And then you add to that, and this is the part where we get pushback from parents, but they're supposed to answer texts from mom and dad right away. But, very often, and this is certainly isn't always the case, but very often the texts are things that could wait. What do you want for dinner tonight? And what time am I going to pick you up after school or whatever?
Mm-hmm.
But then what parents, I think, miss a lot of times is that once you do that and the kid knows, okay, it's a notification from mom, I better look. Now they look at their phone. Well, now they're on TikTok or Netflix or whatever. And so there's this constant battle for attention that's always been there, for as long as there have been teachers and students. This is just, we've never really seen anything like this before, in terms of just the addictive nature of the relationship between a kid and his or her device.
Yeah. And I mean, even adults have that issue where you go to look at an email and then all of a sudden you're on Instagram or whatever, the news app.
Yeah.
And so imagine, the kids underdeveloped prefrontal cortex, they cannot literally resist that temptation to pop around and get that dopamine hit from the social media sites. So when do you first remember this becoming a problem? Was there a specific incident or just generally over time? Joe, do you feel like you remember any incidents where you're like, whoa, this is not looking good?
The first thing that I noticed was the social piece. There's everything we do, there's a cost. When you're doing something, you're not doing a whole bunch of other things. And so, like, for instance, when it used to be if I gave a test, some kids finish in 10 minutes and some kids finish in, half an hour or whatever. That time between where you're just kind of waiting for everybody to be done used to be chaos. And so you'd have, everybody would have their bag of tricks about what, like a stack of magazines or something is way before phones.
Yeah.
Something to just keep kids busy and occupied. And it was around the time when smartphones became just a thing that every teen had, or almost every teen. That it was just, Matt alluded to it earlier, but just, it was very quiet. You have instant compliance. And, in some ways that's, it's nice to have quiet, but that's not what learning sounds like. It's not what learning looks like. Learning's messy and it's loud.
Yeah.
So that for me was the first big tip off that something was different, that you didn't need to worry about kids being quiet anymore. That the worry became the opposite. They're too quiet. That was the main thing. And then it became the battle for attention. In class, you notice that, you would say, hey, can you put your phones away? And the phone would go away. And then you're playing whack-a-mole. So, 5 kids have their phones out. Hey, put your phones away. Phones go away. And then 3 minutes later, 5 more phones are out. It might be the same kids, but it's probably different kids who, got a notification for something or whatever. And then, and so there's this constant chopping up of the lesson, and teaching requires momentum and continuity. And when you're constantly having to change focus and deal with the phones and whatever, it becomes a much more difficult job. And that also was kind of an alarm bell. And so after a while, we all as a staff tend to eat lunch together. A bunch of us do. And we would just talk about it. What's happening in classes? Is everybody seeing this same sort of thing? And I think Matt and I were the two most probably vocal about the changes that we felt like we had seen. And that's when we really started looking and writing and reading.
Yeah. Matt, anything that stood out to you?
Yeah, it kind of circles back to your question about our job being more difficult. Learning isn't just, like Joe said, messy. It's also deliberative. It's long. It's an arduous process. You need focus, right? If you want to internalize information, a lot of the educational technology out there, and AI in particular today, is all about getting answers easier, right? And that's just not how the brain internalizes information. You need to think long and critically. Otherwise, your brain's just going to dump it, right? We dump about 75% of the information we encounter unless you start thinking about it deeply and critically. And if we want to retain knowledge, we want to make knowledge, something that they call desirable difficulty. The harder something is to learn and think about, the more likely you're going to retain that information. And you can't do that if a kid is constantly zoning out every 3 or 4 seconds, right? And Joe mentioned he teaches econ, I teach psychology, we both teach government, right? We teach a whole bunch of stuff that's important, right? Kids are taking these because we want kids to understand our democratic system. We want how markets work and the human mind and that's just some of the topics, right? So kids are going to school. We're up against games that are being designed, using operant conditioning cheaply to grab attention and pull that away from what we're doing. And kids can't think deeply when they're constantly being distracted every 2 or 3 seconds. I thank God that I went to school in an era before smartphones. I remember, I had a TI-83 and my teacher was always yelling because we programmed like little games on it. And, if you talk to our teachers back then, that was the doom of civilization, right? And it probably was, because I would play this game called Fall Down where the ball would just go down and you'd have to, right? And
Yeah.
if they didn't take our stupid TI-83 away, I would have spent the whole time distracted. I can't imagine how entertaining and infinitely, entertaining these devices are today. Like, I couldn't have learned anything.
Yeah. What about the mental health issues that you're seeing? A lot of teachers are reporting way more suicidal thoughts. Are you seeing that in your students?
For sure. The number of students who have significant mental health issues to the point where they're missing not just a day here and there, but significant chunk of time, the number of students on homebound, the number of students who have school avoidance has skyrocketed. And, is 100% of that, because they have a smartphone? Obviously not, but it's a major contributing factor. And there's plenty of studies out there now that are linking, again, overuse. The key is overuse. But the problem that I think people miss is that appropriate use is very difficult for anybody, but especially, again, if you're a child. So we have to be much more intentional about when and how we introduce these devices. But I mean, we've had suicides, we have had tragedies. I don't want to go into the details, but the situations that were unheard of for the first 20 years of my career are borderline commonplace today.
Yeah. Matt, anything else to share on that one?
Again, I can't get into too many specifics, but I have more than probably half a dozen students just within this year at some point hospitalized for suicide or suicidal ideation. It's unreal. And it's really, we were just talking about this yesterday with a researcher from Harvard. She had asked us about the gender differences in phone use. And it's, with boys in particular, they tend to be more gravitating towards like gaming. And for a lot of them, it's very superficial, right? Like, you can see them constantly gravitating. You have to get them off of. One student I have, he's constantly watching videos of indigenous people of South America digging tunnels. I have other kids playing stupid football games, and you can kind of see it, and they're perpetually distracted. And some of these kids are failing out of school because they're spending 7 of their 7.5 hours of school time on their phones. And of course that has obviously mental health impacts on it. But with girls, and again, we're talking generally here, they seem to be able to delay gratification more, which the psychology is there. Their brains, their prefrontal cortex develop a little earlier than boys. But they don't have, many of them don't have that same kind of outward show, but a lot of them gravitate more towards social media, and they're struggling inside. And it's a lot of those students that I see. I had a girl one year, she had been hospitalized for suicidal ideation, and her therapist had convinced her to get off social media for a few months. And she was just talking to me one day about it in one of those free periods. And she looked around the classroom, every kid in there, she could tell you how many followers they had, right? And she knew how that compared. We call that social comparison theory. She knew exactly where she ranked in the social hierarchy, happened to be at the bottom. And she could tell you how many likes they had and all this. It was wreaking havoc on her mental health. And we see stuff like that, unfortunately, all the time.
Yeah. I just spoke with a mom whose 11-year-old daughter died by suicide after a social media addiction in Connecticut. Selena Rodriguez. She would just know all her followers. If she lost one follower, she'd spend hours trying to figure out who it was and try to get them back. So the stats for female teens and how social media is affecting them is very, very clear and not good. 30% of female teens have suicidal ideation. Males, it's not there as much. Yes, because I hear males gravitate towards video games, porn, especially at early ages. Like average age of accessing porn is like 9 or 10 years old. And males externalize these things like aggression, and females internalize. That's exactly the theories that I'm hearing about. So would you say that smartphones really don't belong in the classroom?
Yeah, I mean, there's no there's no place really for a smartphone in a classroom. And we can go. This is a deep one because parents are pretty passionate about this on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
We have a student who once told us that if you see me on my school issued laptop, there's a 50% chance I'm doing something productive. If you see me on my smartphone, there's a 0% chance I'm doing something productive. And obviously that's not scientific, but it lays the foundation for an important point, which is that the vehicle, the phone, is made to be used not very productively.
Yeah,
and,
it's a toy, not a tool.
Exactly, and that's the way they use it is as a toy. And so the big issue that we've got, I think, is that parents, and understand, everybody wants to be in contact with their kid, but parents are often the biggest proponents of making sure their kid has access to their phone. And what's interesting is that if you look at a lot of the surveys that have been done, most adults recognize that there's a problem with young people and their use of technology, their smartphones in particular. They recognize the problem is there in general, but they don't think it's their kid. Their kid's fine. Right. Everybody else is having a problem. And so a parent will think, well, I just need my kid to have the phone so I know when to pick them up at the end of the school day, or so I find out how the test went, or, they like it when I check in and so on. And that's a very sort of like almost seductive narrative to that you can fall into as a parent. And, I've got 3 kids, Matt's got 2, and, we understand that drive to find out how things are going during the day. But we all have to remember, especially, you're a certain age, we all went to school and our parents didn't check in on us during the school day. And I'm not at all calling for things to go back to the good old days, because obviously they weren't always good. But there was then, and there is now, a way to contact a kid if you really need to get in contact with your kid. You call the school office and they go get the kid out of class and they explain what's going on. And what I think sometimes parents don't think about is, if you had to do it that way, if you're about to text your kid and you think about, would I send this, or would I call the school if I had to do it the old-fashioned way? If I had to call the school office, would I still call the school office and say, hey, can you pull Timmy out of class and ask if he wants macaroni and cheese or hamburgers for dinner tonight? Right. My guess is probably no, you wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Would you pull Timmy out of class to find out if they did okay on their physics test or whatever? Again, probably not. It's a tough habit that many of us have to break, but I think for the good of kids and the good of education, we've got to break it.
Well, and if the device just communicated, that's one thing. But the problem is that we're giving our kids devices that then when they look at that text, now they're going over to whatever social media platform, and it's a complete distraction.
Yeah. And there are phones, there are so-called dumb phones, obviously, that don't have internet access. But even that, as far as I'm concerned, a kid needs to be able to, especially a kid, once we start talking about adolescence, a kid needs to be able to get through the day, navigate the school day, deal with friend issues, conflict mediation, et cetera. That is part of the growing up process. As painful as it is, it's part of life and it's part of growing up, and we have to allow them to be present with their friends, with their teachers, with their enemies.
Yeah.
The kids are obviously not if they're in physical danger or whatever, but if they're, when they have kids that don't like them and they don't like other kids, and they have to be part of that. That's the world.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the day, you debrief and how'd it go and what about this and what about that? That's all part of dinner conversation then.
We were shown a video for training, and it was about incorporating more tech into classrooms. And this was a few years ago. And the video opens up with this girl looking at her phone, and she then looks at the camera and is like, I know what you're thinking. I'm on, Instagram right now talking to my besties. And she's like, I'm not. I'm actually in a chat group with a water researcher from Botswana talking about water conservation methods. And that's the opportunity that my phone provides. And that's true, right? Like, the smartphone is a powerful tool, and it does have a lot of productive uses that are unimaginable, right? But the problem that a lot of tech companies make, either intentionally or unintentionally, is that they infer adult minds on children, right? Like kids can't realize the productive side of technology because their brains just are not geared like that. First of all, right? So they have a huge disadvantage compared to adults, right? So if you give them a game and the ability to talk to a water researcher from Botswana to do your water, like they're not going to choose water researcher over overwhelmingly, right? But
Right.
going back to like, it's still hard enough for adults, right? Like I literally tuned out half of what he said, mostly because he's born. But I got a text from my brother from London. I got my phone sitting over here, and I just saw a notification. I saw that,
Yeah.
and every tech person would say, "Oh, that's amazing thing. That message came from across the sea instantaneously. It's now in your lap, right?"
Hmm.
Meanwhile, I can't even focus on my on the podcast about how tech is harming our attention. I'm an adult, right, who wrote a book
Right.
about
Right.
this. So
Right. Right.
again, the idea that kids can use this productively versus are they using it productively is really where we see the major issue with tech in school, especially smartphones.
So it's been reported 80% of US schools have phone bans in place. I hear all kinds of things about implementation. So, Joe, why are we still seeing so much smartphone use in the classroom?
Yeah, because in order to have a cell phone ban be effective, it requires buy-in from the whole school community, from the parents to the administrators to the
Mm-hmm.
teachers. Like everybody has to agree this is a major issue and we're going to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously we're not here today speaking on behalf of our school system, but just the place where we work, we have. I'm sure if you interviewed somebody from our school system, they would say that, oh yeah, we have a cell phone ban, we have a cell phone policy. Well, the way it works for us is it's in a high school, and students can access their phones before school, after school, at lunch, and between classes.
Okay.
And if a teacher allows it. So if you think about that, the only time that you can't have your phone is if a teacher says no.
Mm-hmm. That's
not really buy-in from.
Right.
And then if I say no 100 times to the same kid, is there a consequence for that? And very often in many school systems, there isn't really any consequence.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really left to the teachers to fight the battle. So is there a policy in place? Yep. Is it having any effect? Not really.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can all point to it and say, hey, there's a policy, whatever. But until you get parental support and administrative backing,
then
it's just words.
Right.
Well, there's also a litigious nature to it too. Like we're as teachers told, all right, you don't allow phones in your class unless you want to, but also you can't take a kid's phone, right? There's this, once we do that, we're financially responsible if it falls off my desk or I put it in a little shoe tree and the shoe tree falls down, right? That the teacher, I am now financially responsible for that $1,000 device, right? So we're actually told not to touch it. So really, in essence, all we can do is say, hey, put it away. And you can say that every 5 minutes. But at what point am I just going to sit here for an hour and a half telling you to put it away? Or am I just going to move on with my lesson and hopefully reach the 5 or 6 kids whose heads aren't out in their lap at the moment?
Yeah. Oh, sounds terrible. Well, I've heard of the yonder pouches or even just the shoe pouches, right, that you put over the door and they have to tuck their phone in there. But kids are just bringing dummy phones or old phones and throwing them in there and then actually keeping their real phone. So it's a losing battle. Do you feel like having to give the phone at the admin desk, like in the front office on the way in, and not allowing them to have a device at all during the day? Do you think that would be beneficial or effective?
It'd be helpful, but you have, again, the infrastructure issues. We teach in a school with 3,000 kids.
Oh, yeah. Right.
A lot of phones.
Yep.
And so something like a yonder pouch is super effective, but again, it requires buy-in from the whole community because now you've got to have, I think we have 15 exit doors in our building. So you'd have to have 15 desks set up around the school or limit access to the school, which makes big, long lines in the morning.
Yeah.
Because everybody has to come in and get their pouch and make sure it's sealed. And then they go into the building and then the same thing on the way out.
Right.
So especially when you're talking about great big high schools, some middle schools that are really big, or they're even, obviously elementary schools, there can be 1,000 kids. Mm-hmm. There's a tremendous I would call it an infrastructure problem you've got with phone collection.
Yeah. And parent buy-in.
That's the key issue is you're talking about most parents want their kids to have phones. They want their kids to have access. So not only are they providing the phone for their kid, they're paying for it and keeping the plan active. They want them to have it. So until you get parents on board, as a school system, you have your hands tied behind your back. Your kids really, really want it, and the parents want their kids to have it, and it's hard for the teachers to implement it, and the admin have more on their plate than they can handle with already. It's kind of just this it's easy to kind of develop a fatalistic view of it all, because it really has to start at home. It has to start with the parents.
Mm-hmm.
The solution seems to be that there are apps out there, and the ability to control your kid's phone remotely,
Mm-hmm.
limit their access to TikTok or whatever from 8 to 3. I mean, that technological ability is out there. It just needs to become more widespread. But it really, again, that has to be something that is done at home. It's hard for the schools to put apps on kids' phones. So again, this has to be more of a societal issue that we address.
Right. I've heard of that companies like Bark, who have parental monitoring apps, them partnering with school districts. And so making the app available to parents, but then not a lot of parents are opting in for it. So why do you think, Matt, parents won't leave their kids alone these days?
As a parent, it's totally understandable. When I put my kid on the bus and he goes away, my heart breaks a little bit, and I worry about him. Is he going to be okay? I know that he's having a beef with one of his buddies. I know that he has a test he's worried about.
Mm-hmm.
I worry about him, and it's hard to let go. And I think every parent can kind of identify with that. And, it's not that our parents were any different. They just didn't have that ability. So now we have that ability, and now we're seeing, we call it the digital umbilical cord, the inability to let go. They want to make sure their kids are happy and healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And totally understand that drive, but it's not. It's having the inverse effect. When you are constantly in contact, if I had the ability to reach out my kid and like, hey, how's your fight with so and so? How'd you do on that test? Oh, you're okay. I can virtually pacify him
Mm-hmm.
from a distance,
Yeah.
right? And he doesn't learn coping methods, right? When I was a kid and I remember getting a 1 out of 20 on my spelling test, I had to sit there all day, and it was a terrible spell, still am. But like I had to sit there all day and like dwell on that. I'm the worst in the world at spelling. And by the time I got home, I had, soothed my son. I wouldn't, get off the bus at 2:30, latchkey kid, wouldn't see my parents till 5:30,
Mm-hmm.
right? And at that point, I'd already coped with it. How's your day? Oh, it's fine.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But at the moment, it was the worst thing that happened to me at brooding. We learned coping mechanisms because we were left alone. So I think parents are well-intentioned, and they're very concerned with their kids. And again, that's human instinct. But at the same time, it's having the inverse. It's probably one of the ideas why kids are so lacking resiliency today, is because they don't have that 8-hour period to cope and deal with things on their own.
Mm-hmm.
We do it for them virtually.
Yeah. Teens these days were raised with technology, as their digital pacifier. Like when they were upset, we didn't know any better 10 years ago when they were 2 years old and crying and you just handed them a device. I think most parents are starting to know better, but that's still happening. But yeah, they're missing the opportunity to develop those coping skills from being a baby. I want to touch on, you guys are aware that hundreds of US school districts are suing social media platforms. And now, I think today it was announced several Canadian school boards are suing Meta, TikTok, and Snapchat for $4.5 billion for the addictiveness of the platforms and the increase in expenses that they've had to take on as schools. So what do you guys think about school districts suing social media? Do you think that's helpful? Do you think there's any progress that we'll see from this?
First of all, one thing that businesses understand is, the bottom line, and, you hit them where it hurts, then maybe that's going to be effective. But to me, I still look at school systems and kind of scratch my head, right? On the one hand, you're saying, hey, this thing that you're doing and this product or service that you're selling is really, really bad for kids. Mm-hmm. And then we say, okay, well, why don't we ban the thing, or why don't we do something to address the issue that kids are accessing it or whatever? No, we can't do that.
Right.
So school systems have done, this whole thing where they're turning externally and, wanting to point fingers at industry, and plenty of fingers can get pointed. But it's mind numbing to me that they'll recognize, on the one hand, recognize the dangers and the damages. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, not do anything to really stem the tide. When I was, I'm old enough that when I was in high school, we had a smoking court in school for students. The smoking age here was 16.
Yeah.
And so we provided a place in school for children to go smoke cigarettes during the school day. Mm-hmm. Like, it sounds preposterous. And now we look back on it and go, that was a really bad thing to do.
Yeah.
Thankfully over time they realized that was so bad. But there was obviously a massive lawsuit, and there were tremendous penalties to the tobacco industry because they knew all these things, and they were intentionally making the product addictive, and they were hiding research and so on and so forth. That should sound very familiar.
A teacher told me yesterday she does phone time. Like, okay, you have 5 minutes. I'm going to let you be on your phone, and then you got to put them away. It's like, doesn't make any sense.
No.
But yeah, it sounds like the same thing.
Yeah. Right.
It's worse than that because they are de facto encouraging it, right?
Yeah.
And Joe talks about this a lot, is schools post almost all of their announcements and they make sign up forums and all kinds of things through social media, right? The story I told you about the young lady who had gotten off social media,
Yeah.
she did this over the summer and had a really spectacular rebound. The therapist was really impressed at her recovery, and then school started. And she was so inundated by requests from the teachers in the clubs and the class sponsors, and every element of the school was on posting on Twitter, posting on Instagram. But, she couldn't even sign up to get her cap and gown without having an Instagram account. They did the sign up form through that. Like within weeks, she felt pressured to be back on social media, not to mention like she's at a market disadvantage as a student not being on it, because a lot of kids create little chat groups that then they share test questions and answers ahead of time. Teachers will post reminders and assignments and extra assignments through whatever social media platform they use. Like, so schools are complicit in this too. Our hands are dirty on this as well. So it's great that these school systems are trying to raise awareness about what these companies are doing, but at the same time, they got to look inward too at what they're doing.
Yeah. Not only encouraging the kids to be on social media, but then also it's a privacy issue. I don't think schools should be allowed to be communicating with minors on social media, where social media is saving that content and creating digital identities for these children. Feels illegal.
But it's also think about, and not to dwell on this, but think about, again, I like to think about it back from my perspective. Can you imagine at like 9 p.m. at night, your physics teacher like reaching out to you? Like,
it's kind of creepy.
Calling your landline.
Yeah, it would be super creepy, and two, it'd be totally unwanted, right? I don't want to be reminded about physics at night. I need a break from it. I need to get a space away from it. And this is another issue. A lot of adults have this issue when they're connected to their email on their smartphone. Is there's no time away from things anymore. There's no time to not be a student.
Yeah.
There's no time to not be immersed in the high school drama of your friends. There's no break. These kids are constantly on.
Yeah.
And they can't get away from it. So, that's another issue too.
And the multitasking has been proven to cause stress and anxiety. How about let's end with a few tips for parents. We feel like we have very little control of what happens with device use at school. And we didn't talk about school issued devices, but what would you, if you had, Joe, like parents in front of you, what would you request of them?
The main thing would be to not, give the kid a phone and or at least have them leave it at home during the school day.
Yeah.
All right. If that's not going to happen, then stop texting kids during the school day. I mean, it's even in an emergency, and especially I think in an emergency, you don't want to, drop some big family drama or a death in the family or something on a kid directly while they're in class and the kid's on stage.
No.
That needs to be handled by a professional or you personally. Like, I'm going to come to the school and get my kid out or whatever. So, so all of the communicating that happens during the school day, I think it would be super beneficial to stop that. That's on the one hand, kind of the day to day, but in terms of the looking forward and kind of what can parents do, as a group. My experience has been as a teacher, the only time that school systems change is when there's a committed group of parents who won't go away. And you see a lot of footage of crazy school board meetings where people show up and there's fist fights and people are screaming and whatever. That's not it. That thing makes, it makes social media points and, it gets clicks or whatever. But in terms of changing votes and changing minds, it's a group of parents, and it doesn't have to be 10,000 parents. It can be a solid group of parents that is well-versed and in command of the facts and shows up constantly and continually raises the issue about what is happening to our kids and what schools are doing to protect them. So advocating for a variety of things, and just real quickly, stopping schools from using social media for student-facing communication would be a big one. Getting homework offline. We can't have online textbooks anymore. or we shouldn't have online textbooks anymore. The kids, there's a tremendous amount of research on the benefits of reading from a physical textbook where you can feel the pages and so on. So it's better for kids anyway.
Yeah.
And it also, a textbook doesn't have the added feature of being addictive. No kid I know has been addicted to a textbook.
Yeah.
So that's a big one. And then for younger kids in particular, like elementary schools, and this is one where I can't imagine how a principal or how a school could say no to this. If you have a school that has, let's say 2 second grade classes or 3 fourth grade classes or whatever, multiple classes at each grade level, ask for one of those, really demand that one of those is a low or no tech classroom. And that seems like a very reasonable request, right? The county the school district wants to have technology here and there and whatever else, but we're going to have one place where parents who are super concerned can make sure that their kids get into that room. I don't know. To me, that's a relatively easy ask. But there are lots of things parents can do if they're willing to stick together and be a pain.
Yeah. It's hard. Yeah. I've been pestering my school district tech guy over and over and over just about them having YouTube access in kindergarten on their iPads, adult YouTube. Right. And yeah, I love, you told me about that before, the recommendation to request one class be lower tech. And I love that. And I'm probably going to implement that. I'm touring other Waldorf related schools, which I talk about in other episodes, but low tech schools. And there are charter options that don't have fees. I'm interested to learn how those compare to an actual paid Waldorf school, but okay. Love all that. What about you, Matt? Any tips for parents that you want to add on?
The research is out there, and it's pretty overwhelming that in most ways our addictions to our smartphones aren't helping, right? They're hurting us in our mental health, our ability to focus, our grades, capacity to learn, and the research is out there, and I think there needs to be a movement within parents that it's okay to be the kid without a cell phone, right? Or at least with the kid with a dumb phone, right? And if enough. Right now there's so much pressure among kids, right? If you're a parent and you don't buy your kid a smartphone in the 5th grade, they're going to be one of the only kids in class without it. And now all of a sudden they're instantly a pariah and they're not privy to all the same conversations the kids are having about this game or this app or whatever. And your kid's an outcast. Well, if there's a growing enough movement of parents who are concerned about having happier, healthier, smarter kids, he won't be the only kid in class without, she'll have more friends that they'll kind of connect to. It needs to be kind of, again, like we said earlier, a societal movement that we're concerned with our kids. I mean, it's unthinkable to imagine a 16-year-old smoking a cigarette today and everybody like, well, that's what 16-year-olds do, right?
All our friends are doing it.
Right.
Okay, totally agree. And the research is there. The U.S. Surgeon General report from last year, new book out this week from Jonathan Haidt, The Anxious Generation, I think is a really good resource. I know you guys are working on a new book, right? Or is it an update to your old book?
It's a new book. It's got some of the same themes, but it's a new book.
Okay, good. So yeah, I'm going to keep listeners updated on that. I know you're in early stages, but
thank you.
Okay, we're going to look at some Instagram posts really quick.
Awesome.
It's hopefully going to be fun and not offensive.
You never know, man. Social media.
Yeah, the first one, Matt, hopefully you're not offended. I think that it just needs an explanation. Okay. All right, I'm going to hold it up to the screen. Let me turn it all the way up.
Destroying our kids' education. You look at any measure in the PISA scores, how our students are doing compared to other systems across the world, right? Our kids are failing. And even PISA will point out the likely cause of our major decline in educational results is our infatuation with technology. We give kids devices and we have them have phones and laptops and tablets, and we wonder why they're not learning anything. We're destroying our kids' education.
So that's it, right? Fine.
Well said. Who could have any disagreements with that?
Way to go.
Okay. Ready to go. Totally fine. I was really excited to share that. And there was a lot of people that resonated with it. But so one commenter said, you have Ronald Reagan and Washington cutouts on your wall. The idea that you have any connection to reality is hilarious. I replied, he's a teacher doing the interview from his classroom. But I don't try to get back and forth with these people. But any response, Matt?
Yeah. Yeah, I have most of the presidents on my wall. If you would have scrolled over, I have them right next to FDR. I try to have all sides. I have Ralph Nader poster back there.
That's funny.
We might be rearranging the posters now.
Right.
It's funny. When I was setting up my camera, I thought, it dawned on me halfway through. It's like, I probably shouldn't. But there's somebody behind me. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's
It's
all I
okay,
gotta
Matt.
say.
It's fine. Okay. Next comment. So someone said, I work in a middle school, and when I see some kids' handwriting, I almost can't believe it. Truly, seventh graders whose handwriting looks like a second grader's. So are you guys seeing that as well?
Oh, yeah.
I play a game with my students. I'll say, is it a high schooler or is it my 5-year-old? And I'll have my kids copy something that one of my students wrote, and then we'll put it up side by side. And overwhelmingly, the results are less than chance.
Mm-hmm.
There's almost no difference between my 5-year-olds and my high school students. But yeah, it's pretty bad.
Yeah, and there's also a lot of research about the value of cursive,
Mm-hmm.
actual writing.
Yeah.
And we've gotten away from that, and people would say, well, you don't have to learn how to spell anymore because we have spell check, and you don't have to learn how to write anymore because you can type everything, and so on and so forth. You can think about that, whatever you think about it. But when we know that there's benefits from a particular process, then we ought to do that.
Yeah.
And we know that there's benefits in kids learning how to write and write well.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely gotten worked over time for sure.
I was listening to a pro AI ed tech advocate this morning, and he was going on like, if AI ChatGPT can write a 2-page paper nobody's ever going to read for your kid, who cares?
Yeah.
Why are you having them kid write the paper in the first place if a ChatGPT can do it? And my point is, writing isn't like a skill unto itself. Writing is thinking, right? Writing is the composition of thought. So essentially what he's saying is, who cares, your kids can think, right? So so the research is, the closer you're connected to that process of writing, the more deeply you think about it. And again, like we talked about earlier, the more kind of you can conceptualize the idea. Writing isn't just writing. Handwriting isn't like a nun smacking your hand because you're writing. It's the way we can conceptualize and organize our thoughts and process ideas. So that's the value of writing. Typing doesn't do it the same way that handwriting does.
Right.
So
okay, good. I have heard that they're going to start or keep teaching cursive. I don't know if that's true, but
yeah, I think there's a movement, to bring it back.
Good.
So
if you write something in cursive, the students, I might as well write it in Latin. They'll say, I can't read that.
What?
It's in a foreign language to them.
Oh.
that happens all the time. I'll give a paper back, and I've written my comments off to the side, and I would say at least half of the students will raise their hand and call me over and say, what does any of this say?
Oh no, that makes me
Yeah,
so
yeah.
sad. It's such a beautiful way to write.
So if they're in high school, then that means 10-ish years ago, is I guess when that kind of started, because that has only been a thing for a year or two. So that group of kids who didn't get cursive is now coming through the pipeline.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Hopefully we'll course correct on that.
Yeah.
So another comment says, I don't necessarily think it's technology, social media possibly, but tech and learning-based video games were incredibly helpful for me.
I mean, first thing I would say is that obviously not all screen time is created equal.
Yeah.
So, that's an important thing. But what we're talking about is that it's not simply, so the kid has to read their textbook in order to answer the questions for homework tonight. Okay. Well, all right, the kid has to read a textbook to answer some questions. That sounds very academic. Sounds like they're going to learn something, whatever. Again, in the brain of a kid, you're asking a tremendous amount. Matt and I are very, very careful we don't blame kids in this really at all.
Right.
Because we're doing this to kids. We're saying, hey, here's this device. And you've got all of the video games and movies and TV shows and pornography and social media that you could ever want. But read the chapter about the Babylonians and then answer the questions, and then get off of that and go play outside.
Right.
Are there games and apps and so on that can be helpful for some kids? Of course. But the question isn't that. The question is what else is going on the one hand, and then what are they not doing at the same time? Is there something else they could be doing that's higher value?
Yeah.
And there is value. And we're not, again, like Joe just said, we're not making a blanket statement. I mean, I have a visually impaired student who has an e-reader, and technology opens up doors not imaginable 20 years ago. And that's wonderful. And And for those types of technologies out there that are improving kids' education, all the power to those, right? It's just there's such a vast sea of crap out there that is being touted as revolutionary that is really, and unfortunately, gamified learning is typically falls into that category. It's really trying to utilize some of the cheap operant conditioning techniques a lot of these games use to then squeeze a couple math problems in. And I'm sure that, if you're a kid who's playing 8 hours of video games a day, if you can squeeze in an hour of math in between problem sets. I mean, I watch my kids use it on their school issued devices, and they're required to do, their math or whatever. And the way my son uses it and the way that most kids use it is they rush through the math to get to the game. Right. And again, that's not that deep seated thinking that we were just talking about, that, that desirable difficulty. For some kids that may work, but I think for the overwhelming majority of kids, it's not effective, or as effective as traditional style.
Yeah, and I think something to remember is that we're not talking about it's this thing. You can use this thing, and it didn't have the benefits that we thought it was going to have. We have this program that everybody said was going to be great, and it turns out it wasn't so great.
Yeah.
All right, I've been teaching for 30 years. I can't tell you how many times I've heard, here's the next big thing. And then it turns out to not have been the next big thing. This isn't that. This is, here's this next big thing that's going to be so great. Not only is it not helping, it's hurting. So that, to me, is the difference between a misguided use of technology. Is, if you're misguided use of a pencil or a pen or a calculator or something, you're probably not going to damage the learning. But that is a huge difference between screen-based digital technology tools and others.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to move on to the next post. This one has been viewed 21,000 times.
Nice, Matt.
Okay. A 13, 14, 15-year-old a smartphone and sending them off to school, the teachers can't really compete with that. I'm up talking about fascinating stuff in psychology or something in government like the Electoral College. I can't compete with a game that had billions of dollars invested in how to make it more engaging and addictive. I can't compete with Netflix or social media. I could be juggling, chainsaws that are on fire, and, I'd get half the kids to look up and like, that's cool. You know what I mean?
So
again, well said.
Yeah.
Way to go, Matt.
And I hear that from so many teachers. Like, I have to be an entertainer, not an educator. I have to dance up there and stuff to try to get their attention. So a lot of people are surprised that kids are allowed their phones in class. They're like, why are they allowed their phones in class? I don't get it at work. And so, I mean, we've talked about this throughout the conversation already. Anything to add on that?
When I talk to my students, what is your number one what is the ultimate punishment? Like you just hit mom or something, and it's like the last resort a parent will resort to is taking their kid's phone away. They do that for the most severest of punishments. Why would I do that every day for 30? I have 160 kids. You want that to be what I do on a daily basis, right? If parents struggle to take their kids' phone away, first off, like we talked about, we don't have the ability to. But second of all, just think about what kind of relationship that creates with me and my student. Right. I'm as bad as a punitive parent, and that's a really difficult atmosphere to teach kids in.
Yeah.
That's all I'll add to that.
Yeah. The next comment says, I can't even read it. What a bunch of whiny, out of touch clowns. You have you have an amazing opportunity to leverage that technology, but instead, out of pure fear, you try to ban it.
Pure fear.
Get over yourselves and be better teachers.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean,
that's the
spot on. Good analysis.
It's funny. You could tell the pro tech advocates, and they're almost like a cult, because it's always leverage the technology. And I use technology in class. I have my kids occasionally film videos or put PowerPoints together or do research, or we use it, and that's not our problem. I think our argument is against that. It's all good. And I'd love to go to these people's schools where their kids just are playing on their phones all day. I'd love to see that. Love to see those kids in the future and how it turns out. That's a great experiment. Create that school. Give all your kids smartphones and let them learn as ever they want.
Yeah.
I wouldn't send my kid to that school. I don't think most people would, but do it. How come we don't see those schools popping up?
Right.
Right.
And one thing that I would say to that comment also is that this argument so often gets framed in terms of it's all or it's not. And so
Exactly.
like the comment was, it was so
What a
good,
bunch
but
of
it was,
whiny, out of touch
yeah, what
clowns.
a bunch of whiny clowns and whatever. But the implication is that we're not using what we can use to the best of our ability,
Right.
because we're saying something bad or we're pointing out the dangers that, by the way, I mean, this person may be a PhD technologist. I don't know, but we've done more reading and research on this than, I don't know, most people in the world. And
Yeah.
we've come down on the side of what we've learned
Yep.
is that there's a lot of uphill climb to get to the good stuff. And we're trying to use that good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So the conversation isn't simply use it all the time or never use it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
so I think those comments are just not particularly helpful, because they frame the debate as something much more simple than it is. It's way more nuanced than that.
And again, maybe I don't want to come across whiny, but you want to talk about out of touch. I'll show the video clip of the Botswana girl, we call her,
Yeah.
to my students, and they laugh out loud.
Yeah.
And they,
Right.
you want to talk about all of these pro ed tech types who are saying, the power of this, and they're doing awesome things. Show that to kids and ask them about it. You'll realize it's those people who are out of touch. Kids are happy to tell you they're not being productive on their phone,
Mm-hmm.
that they appreciate it when you restrict their use. Like, kids are happy. Talk to them like we do all the time.
Yeah. Right.
So,
okay. And I think you guys made it very clear through this whole conversation. You're not saying no tech. We can't give our kids any tech and use it as a tool productively, but
it's got to be intentional, and it's
Mhm.
got to be, there has to be a specific purpose. And really, not to continue flogging this poor dead horse, but the idea is you've got in any lesson, and I certainly don't hit this mark with every lesson, but in any lesson, the ideal is, what do I want my kids to be able to do at the end of this lesson? What do I want them to know? And what is the best tool, or what are the best tools to use to get that job done?
Mhm.
Sometimes it involves a screen,
Mhm.
but a lot of times, I would say most of the time, it doesn't.
Right.
But that, for every single lesson, that's what we ought to be thinking about as teachers is, I got to drive a nail into a wall. I don't pick up a saw.
Mhm.
You got to have the right tool for the job.
Yeah. Last one. And this one is featuring me. I just posted this a week ago. It has like over 100,000 views and 100 comments. Let's see.
Executives largely send their children to Waldorf schools, which are low-tech schools. Students at Waldorf schools are not experiencing any major setbacks resulting from their low-tech education. If we were to withhold it from them as much as possible through their schooling, they're fine. They will catch up with their adult brains.
What technology are you learning in your kindergarten class that you plan on using in the workforce?
Okay, so this one's, lots of supportive comments in agreement. So one said, like, my low-tech early childhood educated child is now a very successful software developer. Tech is for later years. Teach them about humans and nature first. Give them 3D life experiences so they intrinsically understand physics, biology, and empathy. But some people are expressing, like, tech executives' children. So I'm comparing tech executives sending their kids to Waldorf schools. They're born with a head start, so they don't have as many setbacks. What kind of comparison is that to public schools with middle and lower income children, which, like, yeah, sure, advantaged kids get more opportunities. Any thoughts on that?
There's definitely truth to that, but that's a valid point. I don't think that's, there's a whole bunch of studies done out there, and this is kind of confirmed by COVID, is, one of the biggest arguments you hear about closing the equitable divide between the haves and the have-nots, especially with regards to technology, given its expense. There's all kinds of studies done out there where you introduce technology to lower income students. It often not only doesn't positively affect students' learning, it negatively affects student learning. So the assumption that bridging this inequitable gap, it's interesting to me because, I think it's more harmful introducing some technologies than good in some instances.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The tech executives, their kids, obviously they've got a big head start in a lot of ways. The point remains, if a low tech or no tech education was harmful, those kids would be harmed.
Right.
You would see delays. You would see them.
Right.
You certainly wouldn't see people. I'll tell you what you wouldn't see is people shelling out what it costs to go to a Waldorf school if the results weren't impressive.
Yeah.
You wouldn't send your kid to a place where you knew that they were going to have delays, or where you were going to have to do the teaching at home. That doesn't make any sense. So yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
The tech executive kids, of course, they have a huge advantage, but what we're not seeing is the damage that you would expect if technology were so critical to learning.
Right.
Because it's not.
Agree. Okay. So someone countered Matt. So Matt, you said something like, what are kids, kindergartners using technology for that they're going to use in their, adult life? So someone said, what non-tech learning happens in kindergarten that's used in the real world?
Oh,
all of it, right? Language development, social skills.
Getting along with people, conflict mediation.
I know. I was like, really?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the skills, and Joe and I do this all the time. We look at the skills Forbes puts out of 21st century skills that they're looking for the workforce. Almost none of them involve technology. They're almost all what we call soft skills, right? They're the ability to communicate, to empathize, to relate, to lead, to follow, all of that's going on. I mean, that's what should be going on in kindergarten, right? Kids, just allowing kids to play. They learn social structure. They learn rule development, creativity, problem solving. I mean, just allowing kids to, here's a ball, go play a game, right? That's when you're playing like some type of game on a device, that world's created for you by someone else. They're the ones creating the rules, right? So in many regards, less is more, but that very much translates to later in life, and that's probably why you see these tech gravitating towards Waldorf is, it creates a general mindset that is applicable in all kinds of scenarios. If you're a great problem solver in logic, or you have good people skills and you're empathetic, or you're going to do well in this world. Somebody's going to put, here's this new device, and you're going to figure it out, and you're going to probably thrive, because it's primarily soft skills that we see being promoted.
Agree. The last two comments. Someone said, I guess I'd rather have my kid actually contribute to society than be a tech executive. Any comments?
I've spent my whole morning watching tech executives with their little mouthpiece talking about the wonderful world of AI, and I'd have to agree with that comment.
Yeah, sure.
I may have a little disdain in my taste right now.
Okay, last one is my favorite. It says, this woman lies or is delusional.
Oh, that's you?
So, thank you. Yes.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm self-deprecating.
I disagree with that comment.
Thank you. Me too. Okay, guys, anything else you want to share this week? Sorry we went so long, but I think there was so much good stuff here. But anything else you want to share today that we didn't cover?
I would want to just reiterate the point. I'm trying to say this every time Matt and I are out speaking to anybody, just that the importance of, I know, and again, the pull to protect our kids is, it is woven into our DNA, and we all want to do it. We all want to be there for our kids, of course. But we have to think about, what is there a cost to being in constant contact with the kid, even if it's just innocuous questions, and actually, especially if it's innocuous questions, that things that could wait until the end of the day. We have to get away from that need to be in contact all day long. So that, if people get anything out of this, maybe that's the thing to at least think about. How much of the day do we spend trying to get in touch with our kids?
Yeah. Okay, Matt.
It just kind of reiterates what we've been saying. We got to get away from this all or nothing mentality. If we want actual helpful educational technology, we have to be intentional. We have to stop just dismissing the other side and saying, oh, they're whiny clowns or whatever, or they're delusional. If we're arguing against that, just because it's technological, it's good. If we want to really see how kids are using it, have an honest and open discussion about, well, here's are the advantages, here are the disadvantages. We wrote the book to counter the argument that there's all advantages, right? And we were just kind of knock at the door. Well, wait a minute, there's some major disadvantages. Why don't we talk about those? And I think the discourse is coming around to people are now kind of open to that conversation, which I think is great. But if we want truly helpful technology and better technology, we have to have these conversations. So we appreciate the forum, and we appreciate the attention you're getting our message on Instagram.
Thanks.
I'm assuming.
Thanks. Yeah, no, it's all good. Instagram comments, I don't read a lot of them, but I thought that would be fun to
I like that. That's a great segment.
It's like mean tweets.
I know. It is like mean. I should have you guys read them next time. I'll just text you.
Yeah, do that. That'd be fun.
Yeah. That'd be fun. Matt and Joe, so we're going to do this again. I want to talk about school issued devices. I want to talk about a few other things that we didn't get to, but thank you again. You guys are the best. I encourage parents to read the book Screen Schooled and then whatever else you guys come up with. It's really so eye-opening. And thank you guys. I appreciate you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for watching.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.